Hello, and welcome to the lecture on reliable research, collecting and evaluating sources. In this lecture, I will be talking through how to find good sources for your research project. Doing so will give us some basic definitions of primary and secondary sources, as well as some techniques for finding good sources, such as determining their reliability, their recentness, their relevance, and their accuracy. So let's get started. We'll begin by asking the question, what makes a good source? As we start our research project, we need to learn how to find good sources. So this week, we will learn how to find those sources and assess them by using the terms recent, relevant, accurate, and reliable from your textbook. We're using those four particular terms because they can help us comb through all the multitude of sources that can be out there on any topic that you may have and figure out which ones will actually be the best to support your work. We'll also be talking about finding sources and how finding sources is not the difficult part. Finding and identifying good sources is the most challenging part. The main tip that I want you to take away this week is that you don't want to waste time reading irrelevant sources. You're going to collect only the ones that you need, and one of the strategies we'll talk about in this lecture is skimming, or how to read a source quickly to find out if it's relevant or not. As you can see from this slide, some of the material that I'll be talking about in this lecture is quite dense. The best way that you can make sense of it is to listen as I talk and pause the lecture, going through and actually doing some of the research during this lecture so that you can gather some of your sources using the techniques that I'm going to discuss. So let's start with identifying sources and thinking about how recent sources become the most relevant. First, I want to give you a reminder that research is exploratory. You are going to be creating a proposal for your research topic, but your focus might change as you collect sources. I want you to follow your interests and keep your audience in mind, and of course, always ask me if you have questions about your sources. So let's talk first about the different types of sources. To use good sources, you need to be able to distinguish between them. There are several different types of sources, and I've picked out 4 for us so that you can start thinking about which ones will be most appropriate for your research. First, there are primary sources. This is actual research conducted and reported on by an author, for example, a case study. This is different than a secondary source, which is someone else's research being discussed by a different author. For example, a book review, perhaps about that case study that was the primary source of research. There are also 2 different ways of reporting on information that's been researched. Popular means periodicals and books written for a general audience. This would be national newspapers and magazines. And scholarly, periodicals and books written for experts in a particular discipline, like medical journals. For our purposes, a good source will likely be published within the last 50 years, and it's probably going to be a secondary popular source. For pop culture, which changes constantly, you really do want a source published even within the last 10 years, and preferably at least 3 of your sources will be published within the last 5 years. This helps your sources to become more relevant because they're up to date, and more recent sources are more relevant than older sources because they're talking more specifically about the current conversation on your topic. So going forward, I want you to think about how you can find popular secondary sources and perhaps some primary and academic or scholarly sources too. But since we're focusing on pop culture and particularly how it manifests in the media, you're going to probably be looking at periodicals and books written for a general audience and sources that are reporting on research that other people have done. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to find reliable sources, and you can actually participate in searching for sources by pausing this lecture, going through the details as I explain them, and then coming back to the lecture, perhaps with 1 or 2 sources already written down. There are 2 different places that you can find reliable sources. Obviously, the internet is the most hard place to research because it is less reliable. It takes more work for you to distinguish if the sources that you find are credible or not, but that doesn't mean that you can't use it. You can find good, reliable sources on the internet. It just takes a little bit more work. Library sources, however, are much more trustworthy. You can trust them immediately, but you still have to make sure that they're relevant, meaning that they work for your particular project. So let's start by looking at the easy one, with the KSU library. This is where you might want to pause the lecture, pull up an internet browser window, and then follow along as I talk through. The KSU library website is currently at library.kennesaw.edu. If you're off campus, you'll need to log in with your net ID and password. And you can begin searching the library catalog and the databases using keywords. Remember, you want to determine keywords before searching, and a keyword is essentially your topic. Remember to include your issue and your pop culture form as your keywords. For example, war in film or violence in TV ads. And hopefully by this point, you already have some idea of what those keywords would be. Even if you end up changing those later, go ahead and pick out a couple that you think would be the most relevant and interesting to research now, and type those into the library super search. I've given you an example on this slide. I've conducted a keyword search of the catalog using the terms war in film. I typed it exactly like that into the super search box, and then I click search, bringing up over 3 million results in the super search library catalog. They're organized by relevance, but I could also organize them by newest date or oldest date. Based on what we've talked about with recent sources being the most relevant, I would probably want to resort these sources so that they're showing the newest date first. I can also look down the left-hand side of my screen and filter my search terms further, looking only for full text, for ones that are peer-reviewed, ones that are available within the library, and then on from there, limiting them more and more to get my search results down. But with over 3 million results coming back, I probably need to modify my keywords because I'm getting too many and it's much too broad. So what I would want to do is rethink, rather than war in film, what are some terms that I could use to help get me more specific types of films so that way my results would be more narrow. You may have to try several variations of either more or less specific words to get the best results for your project. So since my terms were too broad, I modified my keywords to become war in superhero films, making my results much more narrow and returning about 54,000 results. This is still quite a bit, but my topic is now more focused on superhero films as a popular culture, specifically popular culture, rather than war in films in general, which is still a very broad look at popular culture. You'll notice that my result, the very first one, war, politics, and superheroes, ethics and propaganda in comics and film, is very specific to my topic of war and superhero films. Because that title tells me that it's very relevant to what I'm looking at, it could actually lead me to better sources and better keywords. I can click on the title, or I can look at the subject listing, which you can see there in the slide. It says subjects, United States, superheroes, comic books, strips, etc., political aspects, and so forth. Any of those are searchable as keywords, and that can help me narrow my terms so that way my results go from 3 million down to 54,000 and then down further and further until I'm able to have a much more manageable look. You can also write down the call number or click a link if there's access to an ebook, and this will help you find the actual physical text. In this case, I've narrowed my search to what's available in the library collection so that I have easy access to it. You can also search ebooks if you're able to open them online for your keywords so that it can bring you directly to your topic and make your searching much more focused and relevant. Using the library catalog will always return the most relevant results to you for a research project. However, there are times, particularly when we're researching popular culture, that we might want to use internet sources instead. These pose a difficult challenge because we do have to assess the accuracy of these sources. One of the easiest ways to make your results more accurate is not to do a general internet search, for example, using Google. Rather than just typing my keywords into google.com, you can actually type directly into books.google.com or scholar.google.com. This limits the results that you're getting from Google to books and scholarly work, and this helps do part of that job of assessing your sources for accuracy. Books.google.com returns both books and magazines. It allows you to have a limited and full preview of different books and magazines. If you get a limited preview, you can still write down the title and author and request that from the library or check the journal holdings to see if it's available. If you get a full preview, that's even better because you can search and read the text online. The same works for scholar.google.com. It's actually even more academic rather than popular. It's going to bring back a lot of scholarly journals and books, and it does allow you to have a limited preview of those articles. You can write down the title of the article, the author, and the journal and request it from the library. I really don't recommend doing those general internet searches simply because they will return too many results, and they'll force you to spend a lot of time evaluating your sources for credibility. So using one of these limiting searches will actually help you both in terms of the amount of research you're doing and then assessing the accuracy. You can also go directly to well-known publications, like magazines that have a print version, and search their particular sites. Some examples include Scientific American, the Smithsonian, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and so on. If you encounter a paywall, you can go to the library website and select journal holdings. Journals is the name that scholarly people use for magazines. So journal holdings would encompass even popular newspapers. The library may have free access to the journal that you want to use. And a lot of these journals on their websites will have a search icon that allows you to search their archives for different historical sources, as well as contemporary things that have just come out. You can type your search keywords into the search forms on those journal website pages and then come up with things that are both historical and relatively recent. And because you're going directly to these websites that are trusted, then you'll be able to assess their accuracy a lot more easily. Because we're researching popular culture topics, there may be times when a random article from a non-scholarly website seems appropriate for your research. You do need to be able to justify its inclusion in your project. And several ways for doing that include those media literacy strategies that we learned at the beginning of the semester. You can also consider the following. You could ask questions like, is the author an expert in the field that's being researched? And how do you know? This is assessing the author's ethos. Is the organization that supports the website credible? Typically, a website that ends in .edu, .gov, or .org is more credible than a .com. Again, you're assessing the organization's ethos. What is the purpose of the website? Does it have a bias? Is it out to make money? You have to think about why that particular article was created. What is the point of its publication? And is it going to be biased in a particular way because it wants to create facts or create a certain perspective that encourages a particular purpose for that website that might exclude other facts that are important? So you do have to think through the rhetorical situation of that website and of the publication. Is the information on the website recent? You want to find the last updated date, usually at the bottom of the screen. How does the information compare to other sources you found? Is it accurate and reliable when compared to books or more scholarly journal articles? If all of these things check out, then you probably have a source that would still work, even if it comes from a random or more popular website. Just remember that when you're looking at internet sources, you have to do this process of assessing and evaluating to see if those are actually accurate and reliable enough to be included in a research conversation. Another way to evaluate your sources is to practice the strategy of skimming for relevance. Skimming is reading over the surface. It's briefly examining a source to see if it's useful. Here are a few ways that you can learn how to skim. First, you read the introductory sections. In a book, this would be the preface or the introductory chapter. In an article, it would be the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. In a book, you can also look at the table of contents to see if there's anything relevant to the topics that you're researching. You can also flip to the back of a book and check the bibliography or works cited. It can refer you to other useful sources, and actually, a good book on your topic can lead you to all the sources that you would need just by looking at its own bibliography or works cited page. You can also do this with articles too if they're scholarly and well researched. Then you can read the first line of every paragraph in a chapter or in an article. That first line or the topic sentence will help you to get a good sense of what the entire article is talking about without reading it extremely closely on the first pass. Finally, you can write a short summary on the first page of the article if you printed it, or on a separate piece of paper, to remind you of what the source is talking about. This will keep you from having to reread the entire source again later, because you may have forgotten whether or not it was relevant or helpful. Many times people will ask whether or not Wikipedia is an okay source to use. Wikipedia is an open website, which means that anyone, including you, can upload or change the content on any article at any time. This means that the quality and accuracy of certain pages are not reliable. Some pages are extensive and well kept up by the community, but others are not. So the bottom line is, Wikipedia can be a good place to begin research, but it should not be one of your primary research paper sources. Please be sure that you do not cite Wikipedia in your final research project. Remember that you'll be finding both print sources and image sources for your final project. In fact, your final project is going to include several images, plus an artifact that you create. You should cite each image that is created by another person in order to give them credit, the same way that you will be giving credit to those print sources that you use in the written portion of your project. Often, you can find images that are relevant by using your keywords and typing them into images.google.com, just like you did for books or scholar.google.com. When you find an image, make sure it is high quality because you're going to be embedding it into your final project, and it needs to be something that is very clearly visible for people who are going to view your project. You can save it by right-clicking it, or you can take a screenshot of it as long as when you preview it, it still looks good. You can also visit the website where the image appears. You'll need to do this in order to find the creator, the publication that it appears in, the date of publication, and any additional information that needs to be cited. If you cannot locate certain information for citations, you can leave that part of the citation out, but you should be making a good faith effort to include as much information as possible. You're going to cite the images that you use using the MLA format indicated in your handbook or on the Purdue OWL website, other common sources. You can see the web link there, and I'll also provide a live web link for you within the D2L site. So after this introduction to finding and evaluating sources, you do need to get started this week on collecting your own sources for your research project. You should begin looking for them now, even if you don't have a final topic, because the process of research will help you finalize your keywords. Just as you saw in my example where I started with war and film and I needed to narrow it to superhero films in order to get more relevant research, that's the same thing that you need to start doing now. Take your general ideas and begin to narrow them, refine them, and begin looking for sources that are relevant, accurate, reliable, and recent. You're going to begin practicing that this week as you look for 3 sources that could relate to your topic. You want to follow the directions on evaluating them and citing them. And remember, find sources that are relevant because they provide historical context or current trends, that are accurate because they come from publications that are established in their fields and not random internet sites, that are reliable because they contain information that is factual and well researched, and that are recent. They should be published within the last 5 to 10 years and definitely no more than 50 years ago. Finally, I encourage you to cite as you go. Take time to write down all the citation information that you need for sources so that you don't have to do it later. Thanks.